So today, often the most memorable and the most celebrated of the Jewish holidays is, can anyone guess? Passover. That's exactly right. About 80% of Jews, and of course there's a real commandment to welcome non-Jews to the table, and so is the case with Sukkot. During the holiday of Passover, we recall the story of Exodus. And I want to bring that back to your mind because there is a connection here with that story too. Miriam's clever rescue of her little brother Moses from a death sentence, the making of Moses into a prophet, the warnings to Pharaoh to let the Hebrew slaves go, the hardening of his heart, the signs and the wonders and the plagues, the locusts and the boils, the hail and all the rest. The softening of Pharaoh's heart long enough to decide to free the slaves, the quick change of heart once again, and the parting of the Red Sea for the Israelites just in the nick of time for them to escape the Egyptian soldiers and make it to the road of freedom. The journey from slavery to freedom, however, is not just the story of one day of deliverance or even a whole season of miracles. In some ways, Passover leaves off at what is really the beginning of the journey. The Israelites wander for 40 more years in the wilderness of the desert before they reach the promised land. In fact, most of the once enslaved Israelites never make it. Even Moses, their prophet, doesn't make it all the way. It is the next generation who is finally able to arrive and to taste the sweetness and to experience the collective work of liberation. Once the physical chains have been broken, the spiritual and emotional chains remain. Forced to dedicate their lives to a false god, the Pharaoh, the Israelites must learn, who is it that they can now put their faith in? Who is it that they can trust? No longer slaves. This is so important. They are now free to choose whom to follow. The road is hardly simple and straightforward, and we see that they lose their way from time to time. Who could blame them? Some days are so hot. The winds some days are so strong. Can you imagine the winds we had earlier in this week? The sukkah or their booths or their tents would just collapse to the ground. Often there is hardly any food. And some people grow impatient and they complain to Moses. Do you remember this in the story? They say, "Take us back to Egypt. At least there we knew we wouldn't starve to death." Or just at the moment when things seem to culminate and Moses is climbing the Mount Sinai to receive the tablets from God, a symbol of the divine covenant with his people, what do? Or let's put it in modern day context. Just at this moment when, and actually you mentioned, there are many in our country, not all, who have enough bounty that they maybe can count on not going to war. And of course there are others who may not have that bounty. And there are many opportunities for people to find food in this country. There's an abundance of food. When people can't reach it, it's because we won't share or cooperate. So we're living in a time in a wealthy nation with possibility that we could actually feed the whole human family. And what did the Israelites do in that moment? And what do we do, maybe? We start worshiping the golden calf, and have you seen it? It has carved in it a giant T. You've seen the gold T. But Moses returns and he sees their folly. He smashes the tablets, and it seems as if all may be lost, and they may remain in the wilderness forever. But luckily, they and we are given many second chances. And in spite of their imperfections, they manage, and we do manage, don't we? Year after year, to try to get closer and closer and closer to the peace and wholeness and holiness we long for, where all are at peace, where none are hungry, and where all find hospitality and shelter. Yes, they begin to taste the sweetness of freedom. To me, this year, I think about the day in the last year when I witnessed an immigrant that I was involved in companioning who had been unjustly placed in a horrible detention center, the day that he was finally free to hug his infant daughter, free to kiss his wife, free to eat food knowing that he wouldn't be sick from it in the night, free to be with his family and loved ones, free and outside of a terrible law. The holiday of Sukkot is the celebration and commemoration of a 40-year epic journey to reach freedom, which we have to always keep working for. The Hebrew word Sukkot is translated into English as booths. The defining ritual of the holiday is that Jews build booths, temporary dwellings, and spend as much time as possible in them for 7 days. And it's reminiscent of the nomadic lifestyle that their ancestors endured during their time in the wilderness. It is interesting that the holiday doesn't immediately follow Passover, because the stories are so intertwined, but instead lands 6 months later in the year. And one thing that some rabbis have suggested is that it would be natural to go outside in the spring right after Passover. How many of you love to go camping in the spring when it's not too hot and not too cold? And how many of you love to travel in that time? But this week, it reached the 30s overnight, and frost was on all of our lovely harvests, right? So it was much more of a leap of faith to actually go outside and celebrate the Exodus story in this time when things are a little more uncertain represents the leaving behind all the things that you have to leave behind in order to just go for freedom. The sacrifices, the possibility, the joy, the love that you'll be able to glimpse. But you have to be willing, as Martha and Wait Still Sharp were willing, to risk something. And so this time of year is a better replication of that leap of faith. The holiday of Sukkot also follows Yom Kippur, and I think it's important to remember that Yom Kippur, which is the highest of holy days, Jews have prayed and fasted. In part, it is a concentration on self-denial, on the ways we have fallen short, on making amends, and on those we have lost. And after loss comes joy. Joy that surprises us and comes by accident, or joy that we work for. And Sukkot is about both. The story goes on. The road to freedom is long, and it will have challenges, and it will have delightful times. So what do we learn when we move out of our homes? We do learn something about joy and balance. And truly, people are meant to come and eat and enter and be merry and sing and dance. It's a time for a minister to do a little bit of Jewish folk dancing in the room. It is a time for joy and delight. It's a time to slow down and pay attention, to be out of doors, to see the stars through the thatch of your roof, and just to feel awash in the beauty. It's a time to collect leaves, as Asher, my son, did last week, these very leaves, and to make a work of art, of beauty. It's a time to notice and pay attention to the splendor of creation. It's a time to actually resist the materialism of things, and yet, why not adorn your sukkah with silver candlesticks if you have them? It's a time of simple pleasures, and it's a time of sharing what you have to lavish on others. And it's also a time to really dwell not only on joy, but to dwell on what it is that we can count on, what it is that we are rooted in when we don't have the security of a home, of walls. It's an effort to demythologize the construction of walls. And the image that's coming to my mind right now is, how many of you have seen this online? There's the wall at the border between us and Mexico, apparently growing higher and thicker at all times. And right through one vulnerable place in the wall, there is a seesaw where children can actually play with one another from different sides of the wall. That's God's time, Mother Earth's time, justice's time, right in the middle of suffering is pierced the joy of two children, is pierced a vision of another way where those two who are on the same seesaw can be viewed as they are. Children of the one human family, mothered by earth. It's an important holiday for us because we're playing with homelessness and we're playing with the ideas of permanence and impermanence and also the meaning of home. So this year, when we are investing in our beautiful home, look outside. Did everyone notice how smooth the ride was with your cars? And we're building a parking lot, and we're enhancing the old mansion, and we're building a playground, and we're planting 2 trees for every single tree that we have uprooted. And we've got a sign on Columbia Turnpike, may all who are spiritually hungry come and eat. Maybe it'll say that. I think it says the Morristown Unitarian Fellowship. That's what my marker's for. Sandra, just kidding. I mean, whoever does that. Those things are important. This mansion is, of course, important. It's our spiritual home. But we also, at the time that we invest, this is a vehicle for us. We have to remember that we are not a building or even a gorgeous property. If the building were to collapse, would we still be which it won't because it's steel reinforced concrete, but go with me. Would we still be a community Zella?
Yes!
Yes! Sandra and Zella. Her smile is all I need as well. Yes, we would. Of course we would. We are more than beams. We are the relationships that we have with one another. And if there were no relationships and it was an empty building, it would just be a mansion with like pretty acreage, and it wouldn't be a congregation. So that's another thing. It's a reminder that the Israelites, when they were wandering, and as we are wandering in the wilderness these days, that ultimately where our security comes from is from right relations with one another. Who can I count on? This is one of the communities that I can count on. And it's through building up relationships of justice and love with neighbor, with friend, with stranger alike, and building a world where the child on both sides of the seesaw matters. That's ultimately the solid construction that we need. So the sukkah is really an opportunity to practice having an open wall that anyone could enter. And if you can imagine, this is just one sukkah, but the vision, right, was a group of people, a community, the Israelites in the wilderness, practicing in hundreds of thousands of sukkahs on their journey, open to one another's greed and one another's generosity, to one another's anger and to one another's patience, to one another's love and to one another's temptation to other, and learning how to be one strong community together, to practice living in liberation time even before they could see a city called Israel. Because otherwise they would have arrived there unable to behave in new ways, unchanged, and still bearing the tendency to worship the golden calf. So that might be why the holiday is 7 days and on an annual basis. What a lengthy spiritual practice. It's like a retreat, really, when you think about it. But let me return one more time to the joy, because when you look at the roof, right, it has to be separated enough that you can see the stars through it. So when you're sleeping, you can enjoy the stars and know that you are at one with all that is beautiful. And if the following evening you happen to be drinking soup or eating soup, what do? Do you drink soup? Do you eat soup? Anyway, you're spooning soup in your mouth, and it's drizzling. You say, oh, how pleasant. Look how nice the leaves glisten in the drizzle. But if it starts to rain, and that rain gets in your soup and it's going to ruin it, guess what? You interrupt your spiritual practice to go inside, because no one likes it when 4 ounces of water is dumped in their Harvest Bounty soup. So again, joy. We're always touching joy here, and constantly being reminded of what matters most. And so I'll end having lifted up the themes of hospitality, greeting the stranger, justice, beauty, whimsy, all the things, the story of the Exodus, what really allows us to touch freedom, and ultimately what the Sukkah time is about this one precious, beautiful life that we have. And there's a story shared by the rabbis about a fox, and we are, of course, the fox, and a vineyard. This sly fox saw this beautiful vineyard, and he thought, let me see how I can get in. Now, he saw there was a little opening, but he couldn't fit through it. So you know what he did? Like on Yom Kippur, he fasted, but he fasted for 3 days until he was skinny enough. I'm not sure why that fox can't dig under, but that's never mind, not here nor there. He gets through, and then he gorges on all the grapes in that vineyard. Oh, they're all mine. Oh, I'm so excited. I'm going to get drunk and have grape jelly and wine and fox pie. And then guess what happens? He gets fatter and fatter and fatter. So this is an interesting situation, a fox who can lose so much weight in 3 days and gain so much weight in 3 days, but you know. And then he can't get out. So what does he have to do? He has to fast again. He fasts for 3 days, and then he is able to squeeze back through that fence, a skinny fox on the other side. And so what does that remind us? That we enter this life with just our being and not much else. And it's an opportunity to delight. It's an opportunity to give away love. It's an opportunity to forge community. It's an opportunity to make a difference. And then at the end of our days, we leave this Sukkot, this sukkah, this harvest sukkah with lots of grapes, with only what we entered with, our being and who we are. And hopefully, we have spent our time leaving a legacy of love, compassion, mercy, and something of the sheltering presence of the divine in our wake. May it be so.